The reek of antiseptic and despair clung to the walls of the clinic like a second skin. It was a smell I knew intimately, the scent of my life for the past 3 years. It was the smell of poverty trying to stave off disease, of hope wearing thin against the relentless grind of survival. Tonight, it felt particularly suffocating, a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. My scrubs, worn soft and thin from 1,000 washings, felt abrasive against my skin, and the ache in my feet was a dull, constant throb that radiated up my legs. It was 2 a.m, the hour when the city's ghosts and its most desperate souls came seeking solace, or, at the very least, a temporary reprieve from their pain. My own desperation was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Rent was due, not just due, but overdue by 2 weeks. Mr. Henderson, my landlord, a man whose patience was as thin as the walls of my apartment, had slipped a final notice under my door. That morning, the stark red letters of eviction had screamed at me, a visual representation of the panic clawing at my insides. On top of that, Lily's fever was back. My sweet 5-year-old daughter, whose world should have been filled with playgrounds and picture books, was trapped in a cycle of sickness that her meager insurance barely touched. The prescription for the stronger antibiotic sat folded in my pocket, a cruel taunt. It cost $112. I had 37 cents in my bank account. The source of this financial black hole, the architect of my ruin, was Kevin, my ex, the father of my child, a man with promises as slick and empty as a politician's smile. He had swaggered into my life with a charming grin and dreams of a big score, and swaggered out 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but a forwarding address for the void and a mountain of debt taken out in my name. The worst of it was the $4,000 he'd borrowed from a man named Silas, a man who didn't use collection agencies, a man whose enforcers had paid me a visit last week, their smiles thin and predatory, their polite suggestions about timely payment feeling like daggers against my throat. So I did what any cornered animal would do. I fought. I took every extra shift at the clinic, worked until my vision blurred and my hands shook from exhaustion. I sold my grandmother's locket, the last piece of my past that held any joy. I ate 1 meal a day, usually stale crackers and lukewarm coffee, but it was like trying to fill the ocean with a teaspoon. The hole was too deep. The swinging doors of the clinic burst open with a violent crash, startling me out of my bleak reverie. 2 men filled the entrance. One was huge, a mountain of muscle packed into a tailored black suit that strained at the seams. His face was a mask of grim urgency. He was supporting the other man who was slumped against him, one arm draped over the giant's shoulders. The second man was tall, but leanly built, his movements unnervingly fluid, despite the dark, spreading stain on the side of his pristine white shirt. Blood, a lot of it. My training kicked in, a blessed anesthetic for the panic that flared in my chest. I grabbed a wheelchair, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "In here. Get him into the chair. What happened?" The giant grunted, maneuvering the injured man with a surprising gentleness. "Business disagreement." His voice was a low rumble, laced with an accent I couldn't quite place. He lowered the man into the chair, and for the first time, I got a clear look at him. My breath caught. He was handsome, but it was a dangerous kind of handsome, the kind that belonged to predators. His face was all sharp angles and unforgiving planes, from a strong jaw dusted with dark stubble to a straight, aristocratic nose. His black hair was thick and slightly disheveled, and his eyes, when they flickered open to meet mine, were the color of dark, old whiskey. They were filled with pain, but underneath it, there was an intelligence, an intensity that was utterly captivating and deeply unsettling. A faint, expensive scent of cologne, sandalwood and something else, something wild and masculine, cut through the clinic's sterile stench. "I need to get him onto a bed. Now," I commanded, pushing the chair towards the nearest examination room. The giant followed, his heavy footsteps echoing my frantic heartbeat. Inside the small, curtained-off space, the giant helped me lift him onto the narrow bed. The man hissed in pain, his jaw clenching, but no other sound escaped his lips. His control was unnerving. "I need you to wait outside," I told the giant, my hands already reaching for a pair of sterile gloves and surgical scissors. "No," he stated flatly. It wasn't a refusal so much as a declaration of fact. I didn't have the time or the energy to argue. "Fine. Stay out of my way." I turned my attention back to my patient. I carefully cut away the fabric of his shirt, the expensive silk parting to reveal the source of the bleeding. It was a gunshot wound, clean through the side, just above his hip. A through and through. Lucky, but he was losing blood fast. "We should be at a hospital," I muttered, pressing a thick gauze pad against the entry wound. The man's eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow. "Why did you bring him here?" "Hospitals ask questions," the giant said from his post by the door. "We don't like questions." Of course. This was something far outside the realm of workplace accidents or muggings gone wrong. This was organized, criminal, a cold dread, separate from my own personal terrors, began to seep into my bones. I was a nurse. My job was to help, not to ask why. I pushed the fear down and focused on the task. "I need to clean it and stitch it. I don't have proper anesthetic, just a local lidocaine injection. It will still hurt," I said, looking at the injured man. His eyes opened again, locking onto mine. A flicker of something amusement, respect, passed through them. "Do what you must," he whispered, his voice a rough rasp. As I worked, the silence in the room was thick and heavy. The only sounds were the crinkle of sterile packaging, the clink of my instruments on the metal tray, and the two men's steady breathing. I injected the lidocaine, my movements practiced and sure, and then began the painstaking process of cleaning the wound. The giant, the bodyguard, stood like a stone sentinel by the door, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He was watching my every move, his expression unreadable. He started muttering under his breath in Italian, a stream of worried, frustrated words directed at his boss. It was a dialect I recognized, coarse and countrified, but familiar. My grandmother, my Nonna Sophia, had spoken a similar one. He was pacing now, a caged bear. "Dobbiamo andarsene. Questo posto non è sicuro. L'hai portata dritto qui," he growled. "We have to go. This place isn't safe. You brought her straight here." He had made a grammatical mistake, a common one for speakers of his dialect. When trying to formalize their speech, he'd use the feminine pronoun lei as her instead of the formal you. Without thinking, my brain running on autopilot fueled by exhaustion and adrenaline, I corrected him. My voice was quiet, almost a murmur. "It's lo ha portato, not la hai portata. You're speaking to him, not about a woman." Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. The giant froze mid-pace. He turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing to suspicious slits. The air in the room crackled, the tension suddenly unbearable. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. What had I done? My stupid, tired brain had just put a target on my back. These were not men you corrected. These were not men you drew attention from. I kept my eyes down, focusing on the suture I was threading, my hands suddenly feeling clumsy and cold. I could feel both of their gazes on me, one burning with suspicion, the other with a new, unnerving intensity. Then the injured man spoke. His voice was no longer a whisper. It was low, resonant, and held an unmistakable note of command that sent a shiver down my spine. "Marco, si capo," the giant Marco replied, his tone immediately deferential. "Lasciaci soli," the man on the bed ordered. "Leave us alone." Marco hesitated, his gaze flicking between me and his boss. It was clear he didn't want to leave. "But Dante—" "Now," the man Dante said. The single word was laced with steel. It was not a request. Marco gave me one last hard look before turning and exiting the room, pulling the curtain shut behind him. The sound of the fabric sliding on the rail was like a guillotine falling. I was alone with him, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I concentrated on my work, my focus narrowed to the needle and thread, the pale skin and the dark oozing wound. I could feel his eyes on me, a physical weight. "You speak Italian," he stated. It wasn't a question. "My grandmother was from Sicily," I said, my voice tight. I finished a stitch, pulling it taut. "What is your name?" "Alara." I didn't look up. I couldn't. His gaze felt like a magnet, and I was afraid if I met it, I wouldn't be able to look away. "Ilara," he repeated, tasting the name. "You have steady hands, even when you are afraid." My own fear was a bitter taste in my mouth. He could smell it on me, just like I could smell the expensive cologne on him. We were two different species of predator and prey, suddenly locked in a small, sterile room. I finished the last stitch and snipped the thread. "I'm done," I announced, my voice trembling slightly. I began to dress the wound, my movements quick and efficient. "You need antibiotics. And you? I need to stay off your feet. This isn't a hospital. I've done what I can, but you're at high risk for infection. You are a good nurse, Ilara." He said it with a finality that brooked no argument. As I taped the final piece of gauze in place, his hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around my wrist. His grip wasn't painful, but it was unbreakable. It was the grip of a man used to taking what he wanted. I froze, my breath hitching. His skin was warm, his fingers calloused. I slowly lifted my gaze from his hand to his face. His whiskey-colored eyes were boring into mine, searching for something. He saw it all. I was sure of it. The exhaustion, the fear, the desperation simmering just beneath the surface of my professional calm. He saw the frayed collar of my scrub top, the faint shadow of a bruise on my arm from where one of Silas's men had grabbed me a little too hard. "You are in trouble," he said, his voice soft, almost a caress. It was more terrifying than if he had shouted. "You carry it around you like a shroud." I tried to pull my wrist free, a pathetic, token gesture of defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a cold, humorless thing. "Do not lie to me, Alara. I despise lies." He released my wrist as abruptly as he had grabbed it. He pushed himself into a sitting position, ignoring the fresh wave of pain that contorted his features. He was already asserting his dominance, refusing to be the patient any longer. He looked around the small, shabby examination room, his gaze lingering on the water-stained ceiling tiles and the cracked linoleum floor. His expression was one of distaste, as if the poverty of the place was a personal offense. Then his eyes landed back on me, sharp and calculating. "Marco!" he called out, his voice strong again. The giant bodyguard was inside the room in an instant, his presence once again sucking all the air out. He looked at Dante, then at me, his face a thundercloud of suspicion. Dante Moretti swung his legs over the side of the bed, his jaw tight. He pointed a finger at me, a casual, damning gesture. His next words were spoken to Marco, but his eyes never left my face. They were a death sentence and a life raft all at once. Find out everything about her, where she lives, who her family is, what wolves are at her door. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then go to the car and tell the others. She's coming with me. The next 24 hours passed in a surreal, exhausted blur. After Dante and Marco left, leaving a thick roll of $100 bills on the counter that was more money than I'd seen in my entire life, I finished my shift in a daze. The money felt dirty, dangerous, but I took it. I had to. I paid for Lily's prescription on the way home, the guilt and relief warring within me. The relief won. For a few precious hours I could breathe. I gave Lily her medicine, her small, feverish body finally relaxing into a deep sleep. I sat by her bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that everything might be okay. That this strange, terrifying encounter was just that, a single, anomalous event, a story I would one day tell with a shudder. I was wrong. I was woken from a shallow, dreamless sleep by a sound that didn't belong in my rundown apartment building. It was the low, powerful rumble of multiple high-end engines idling. It was a sound of wealth and power, utterly alien to our street of cracked pavement and overflowing dumpsters. I crept to my window, my heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I peeked through the grimy glass. Down below, parked in a perfect, menacing line, were 4 gleaming black SUVs. They were identical, their tinted windows like the soulless eyes of insects. They absorbed the weak morning light, radiating an aura of silent, coiled threat. Men in dark. Suits stood by each vehicle, their postures relaxed but alert. They were soldiers, an occupying army. My blood ran cold. "She's coming with me." The words echoed in my mind, no longer a strange, fever-induced memory, but a terrifying prophecy. They were here for me. A sharp, authoritative knock sounded at my door. It wasn't the hesitant rap of a neighbor or the impatient banging of the landlord. It was a sound that expected to be answered. Immediately, I stood frozen in the middle of my small living room, the threadbare rug suddenly feeling like quicksand beneath my feet. Lily was still asleep in the other room. My first instinct, primal and overwhelming, was to protect her. I had to get them away from her. The knock came again, harder this time. "Miss Alara." A familiar, deep voice rumbled from the other side. "Marco." My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door, my mind racing. What could I say? What could I do? I was a nurse with 37 cents to her name. They were, whatever they were, a force of nature I had no hope of resisting. I opened the door a crack. Marco stood there, looking even larger and more imposing in the narrow, dimly lit hallway. He was flanked by 2 other men, both dressed in the same severe black suits. They were a wall of impassive, disciplined force. "Mr. Moretti sent us," Marco said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "He requests your presence." I can't," I stammered, my eyes darting towards Lily's bedroom door. "My daughter is sleeping. She's sick." Marco's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "We know. Lily, age 5. recurring tonsillitis, and a secondary bronchial infection. Her new prescription is amoxicillin clavulanate. Mr. Moretti is aware of the situation. He has already arranged for a pediatrician to be waiting for her. The casual, comprehensive knowledge of my life, of my daughter's private medical details, was more terrifying than any overt threat. It was a violation. They had peeled back the layers of my existence and examined every pathetic detail, find out everything about her. He had meant it literally. "What do you want?" I whispered, my throat tight. "You need to come with us," Marco said simply. "Mr. Moretti wishes to speak with you. He is a man who does not like to be kept waiting." It wasn't a request. It was an abduction, wrapped in the thinnest veneer of civility. I looked at the men, at their unyielding expressions, and I knew I had no choice. Arguing would be pointless. Resisting would be dangerous. My only hope was to comply, to go with them and try to reason with the man in charge, the man with the whiskey-colored eyes and the unbreakable grip. "Let me get my purse," I said, my voice hollow, "and check on my daughter." Marco nodded, a curt, almost respectful gesture. "We will wait." I slipped back into the apartment, my body moving on autopilot. I looked in on Lily, her face peaceful in sleep, her breathing finally even. A wave of love so fierce it was painful washed over me. I would do anything to keep her safe. Anything. I scribbled a hasty note for my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who had a key and had agreed to look after Lily while I was at my morning shift. A shift I would now be missing. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. "Family emergency. We'll call you later. Please look after Lily." I grabbed my worn-out purse, the strap frayed and the leather cracked, and took one last look at my shabby apartment. It was a cage of poverty and fear, but it was my cage. I was about to be traded to another. I could only pray it was a better one. Walking out of my building was like a scene from a movie. My neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. Mr. Henderson, the landlord, was standing on the stoop, his usual belligerent expression replaced by one of slack-jawed shock. As I passed, one of Marco's men peeled off and approached him. I didn't hear what was said, but I saw the man hand my landlord a thick envelope. Mr. Henderson's eyes went wide, and he nodded dumbly, scurrying back inside his own apartment without another glance in my direction. They were solving my problems without even asking, erasing them. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like they were erasing me too. My life, my struggles, my identity all being systematically dismantled and replaced by their will. Marco held the door of the lead SUV open for me. The interior was a shock to the senses. The scent of rich leather and wood polish filled the air. The seats were plush, the cabin silent and cool. It was a bubble of extreme, insulated wealth. As I slid inside, the heavy door closing with a solid, definitive thud, I felt a profound sense of dislocation. I had just been extracted from my world. The Alara, who worried about rent and overdue bills, was gone. In her place was a woman being chauffeured in a black SUV to an unknown destination, a captive of a dangerous and powerful man. The gilded cage was closing around me. The drive was long and silent. I stared out the tinted window as my world of gray, crumbling brick and graffiti-stained concrete gave way to leafy suburbs, then to wide, open roads flanked by rolling hills. We were leaving the city, leaving everything I knew far behind. With every mile that passed, the knot of fear in my stomach tightened. Marco sat in the passenger seat, a silent, stoic statue, while another grim-faced man drove. No one spoke. The silence was a form of intimidation in itself, designed to make me feel small and isolated. It was working. Finally, we turned off the main road and onto a private drive, marked by an imposing set of wrought iron gates. The gates were a work of art, intricate and massive, topped with sharp, menacing spikes. They swung open silently, as if by magic, to admit our convoy. A long, winding driveway, lined with perfectly manicured cypress trees, led us up a gentle hill. And then I saw it. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion, a palace, a fortress of pale stone and dark glass that seemed to have been carved directly from the hillside. It was a monument to power and wealth, imposing and beautiful in equal measure. It looked out over a sprawling valley, the view breathtaking and absolute. The owner of this house didn't just live here. He reigned. The SUVs pulled into a circular driveway in front of the main entrance, the crunch of gravel the only sound. The engine cut off, and the sudden silence was profound. For a moment, I just sat there, overwhelmed. This was Dante Moretti's world. A world where a gunshot wound was a business disagreement, and a fleet of SUVs could be dispatched to collect a woman he'd met only once. Marco opened my door. "This way, please." I stepped out, my worn-out sneakers feeling sacrilegious on the pristine flagstones. The air here was different, clean, fresh, scented with pine and damp earth. It was the smell of money. We entered through a pair of massive wooden doors that opened into a foyer the size of my entire apartment. The floors were polished marble, reflecting the light from a colossal crystal chandelier that hung 2 stories above. A grand sweeping staircase dominated the space, its dark wood banister gleaming. Priceless-looking art adorned the walls, dark, moody oil paintings that seemed to watch me with ancient eyes. The sheer scale of the place was designed to intimidate, to make any visitor feel insignificant. A woman was waiting for us. She was older, with her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression stern but not unkind. She wore a simple, elegant black dress. "This is Sophia," Marco said. "She will show you to your room." My room? The words sent another jolt of alarm through me. This wasn't a brief meeting. This was an extended stay. Sophia gave me a brief, assessing look, her eyes taking in my send. Cheap jeans and frayed scrub top. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a quiet professionalism. "Follow me, please, Signorina." I followed her up the grand staircase, my hand trailing hesitantly on the cool, smooth banister. We walked down a long, wide hallway carpeted in a thick, plush runner that muffled our footsteps. Sophia stopped at a set of double doors and pushed them open. The room was larger than my living room and bedroom combined. A huge 4-poster bed with crisp white linens dominated the center. A seating area with a plush sofa and armchairs sat before a stone fireplace. A set of French doors opened onto a private balcony with a view of the valley that made my breath catch. On the bed, laid out with meticulous care, was an assortment of clothing: silk blouses, tailored trousers, cashmere sweaters, and a simple but obviously expensive dress. There were shoes, 2 leather boots, elegant flats and heels. Underwear and toiletries were arranged on a small table. "Mr. Moretti thought you might need some things," Sophia said, her voice neutral. "The bathroom is through there. Please, freshen up. Dinner will be in 1 hour. I will come for you." She left, closing the doors softly behind her, leaving me alone in the opulent silence. I walked slowly around the room, touching the soft fabric of a sweater, the cool surface of the marble-topped dresser. It was all a dream, a beautiful, terrifying dream. I felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace, utterly out of place. This wasn't my life. These weren't my clothes. I showered in the attached bathroom, which was a sanctuary of marble and chrome, larger than my kitchen. The water was hot, the pressure perfect. I used the fragrant, expensive soap and shampoo, washing away the scent of the clinic, the scent of my old life. I dressed in a pair of the tailored black trousers and a soft, cream-colored silk blouse. They fit perfectly. Of course they did. He would have had my way, measurements taken. Somehow, the thought was both invasive and, in a strange, unsettling way, impressive. The level of detail, the sheer logistical power it took to orchestrate all of this in less than a day, was staggering. An hour later, exactly as promised, Sophia knocked on my door. I followed her back down the stairs and through a series of grand, echoing rooms to a formal dining room. A long, dark wood table that could easily seat 20 dominated the space. Only one place was set, at the head of the table. Dante Moretti was already there, standing by the large window, looking out at the darkening landscape. He had changed into a dark gray sweater and black trousers. He moved with a slight stiffness, the only outward sign of his injury from the night before. He turned as I entered, and his whiskey-colored eyes swept over me, an approving glint in their depths. "Alara," he said. His voice was a low, intimate rumble that vibrated through the vast room. "You look better. Where is my daughter?" I asked, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. It was the only question that mattered. "She is safe," he said, gesturing to the chair set for me to his right. "She is in the guest wing of this house, in a suite of rooms with a woman named Elena, a highly respected pediatrician who, until yesterday, worked at Johns Hopkins. Your daughter has been examined, and her new treatment has begun. She is currently sleeping soundly." The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. He had not just arranged for a doctor. He had flown in one of the best in the country. He had transplanted a piece of my life into his world, just as he had transplanted me. I remained standing. "I want to see her. After we eat," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Sit, Alara." Reluctantly, Saturday. The chair was heavy, the leather cool against my back. Servants I hadn't even noticed appeared silently, filling my water glass, placing a basket of warm bread on the table. "I don't understand any of this," I said, my hands clenched in my lap under the table. "Why am I here? Why did you do all of this?" Dante sat down, at the head of the table, the undisputed king in his castle. He watched me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Last night, in that clinic, I saw a woman of strength and intelligence, trapped by circumstances she did not create. I saw a lioness in a cage of someone else's making. I do not like to see such things go to waste." "So this is what? A charity project?" I asked, a bitter edge to my voice. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Do not mistake my actions for charity. Charity is for the weak. This is an investment, an acquisition. The food came, course after course of exquisite dishes I couldn't name, served on fine china. I barely tasted it. My stomach was a tight knot of anxiety. Dante ate with a refined, unhurried grace, seeming perfectly at ease with the tense silence between us. Finally, after the plates were cleared and we were alone again, he leaned forward, his forearms resting on the polished table. The full force of his attention was on me, and it was suffocating. "Let us speak plainly, Alara," he began, his voice low and serious. "Your ex-boyfriend, Kevin, has left you with a significant amount of debt. $4,000 to a loan shark named Silas Cruz, and approximately $22,000 in credit card and personal loans. Your rent is 2 weeks overdue. Your daughter requires medical care you cannot afford. You are, by any objective measure, drowning. He laid out the ugly facts of my life as if he were reading a stock report. Hearing it all listed so clinically, so coldly, was humiliating. I felt my cheeks flush with shame. I have a proposition for you, he continued, his gaze unwavering. I will solve all of your problems. Every single one. Silas Cruz will be persuaded to forget your debt. He will never bother you again. Your other debts will be cleared. Your landlord has already been compensated for his trouble and will not be bothering you about eviction, because you will no longer be living there. Your daughter Lily will receive the best medical care money can buy, for as long as she needs it. She will have tutors, anything she desires. You will want for nothing. It was an impossible offer, a fantasy, the complete and total erasure of every single worry that kept me awake at night. I stared at him, searching for the catch. There was always a catch. What do you want in return? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You? He said simply. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and absolute. You will stay here, with me, in this house. You will not return to your old life. You will be under my protection. Your life, and your daughter's life, will be my responsibility now. A gilded cage. He was offering me a gilded cage. Safety, security, luxury, at the cost of my freedom. Why? I asked again, desperately trying to understand his motives. You don't even know me. For the first time, a flicker of something raw and unguarded crossed his face. He looked away, his gaze distant. My mother, he said, his voice tight with an old, deep pain. She was a brilliant woman, a musician. She fell in love with a weak man, a gambler. Not my father, but a man who came after. He bled her dry, emotionally and financially. He used her, broke her spirit, and left her with nothing. She couldn't recover. I was a boy, too young, too powerless to stop it. I watched him destroy her. He looked back at me, and his eyes were blazing with a fierce, protective fire. I will not stand by and watch it happen again. I see her strength in you, Alara, her resilience, but I also see her vulnerability. I have the power to protect you from the wolves, and I will. His backstory wasn't an excuse. It was a reason, a deeply buried trauma that now drove this powerful, dangerous man. He wasn't just acquiring me. He was trying to save a ghost. He was trying to rewrite his own past by controlling my future. I was still reeling from the weight of his confession, the raw pain that had briefly surfaced, when a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the house pricked at my senses. It was a faint but palpable change, a tightening of the unseen web of security that surrounded us. Dante felt it too. His head lifted, his body going perfectly still, like a predator sensing a rival in its territory. His eyes, which had been focused on me with burning intensity, now shifted towards the large windows, his gaze sharp and distant. A moment later, Marco entered the dining room. He didn't speak, but his presence was a statement. He stood just inside the doorway, his posture rigid, his face a grim mask. He gave Dante a short, almost imperceptible nod. Dante pushed his chair back, the sound scraping harshly in the silent room. "It seems we have uninvited guests," he said, his voice a low growl. The brief vulnerability he had shown me was gone, replaced by a chilling calm, the cold focus of a commander on the battlefield. "What's happening?" I asked, my own fear spiking in response to the sudden tension. "Stay here," Dante ordered, his eyes locking onto mine. "Do not leave this room." He turned to Marco. "Double the perimeter guard. I want eyes on every approach." "Who is it?" "A single vehicle," Marco reported, his voice clipped and professional. "Stopped just outside the south gate. It's the Falcones. Looks like Niccolo Falcone himself." Dante's jaw clenched. The name clearly meant something to him, something significant and unwelcome. "Just him? He appears to be alone." "A gesture of diplomacy," Marco said, the last word laced with sarcasm. "A snake never travels alone," Dante muttered. He strode towards the door, pausing to look back at me. The protective fire in his eyes had intensified, but now it was mingled with a dangerous possessiveness. "This," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is why you need me. Your world of overdue rent and playground fevers is over, Alara. Welcome to mine." He and Marco swept out of the room, leaving me alone in the cavernous space. The silence they left behind was more terrifying than their presence. I could hear the faint, distant sound of men's voices, sharp and authoritative, echoing from the foyer. The house, which had felt like a luxurious palace moments before, now felt like a fortress under siege. The beautiful art on the walls seemed to mock me. The opulence, a thin veneer, over a brutal, violent reality. My first instinct was to run, to hide, to find Lily and barricade ourselves in a room until this was all over. But where could I go? I was a prisoner here, no matter how gilded the bars of my cage. Dante's words echoed in my head. "This is why you need me." He was using this threat, this intrusion from his world, as a tool, a lesson. He was demonstrating, in the most visceral way possible, that the dangers I had faced before the loan sharks, the eviction notices, were nothing compared to the dangers he navigated daily. He was showing me that my only hope of survival was to cling to him, the more powerful predator. My anxiety was a frantic bird beating its wings against my ribs. I couldn't just sit here. I crept to the dining room door, cracking it open just enough to peer into the grand hallway. I could see Dante standing near the main entrance, flanked by Marco and two other immense men in suits. He was watching a large screen on the wall, which I now realized was a high-definition security monitor. It showed a crisp, clear image of the front gates. A sleek silver sports car was parked on the road just outside. A man leaned against it, bathed in the cold, white light of the security lamps. He was handsome in a flashy, arrogant way, dressed in a fashionable suit, a smirk playing on his lips as he stared directly into the camera, as if he knew Dante was watching. "This must be Niccolo Falcone. He's baiting you," Marco said, his voice low. "Of course he is," Dante replied, his tone laced with contempt. "He's testing the defenses, seeing how we react. He knows we hit his shipment last week. This is his way of asking for a meeting without admitting defeat." Hit his shipment. The words were so casual, so businesslike, but they spoke of a world of violence and high-stakes crime that made my blood run cold. The gunshot wound Dante had sustained. It was from this. From a war I couldn't even begin to comprehend. "Let him wait," Dante commanded. He turned away from the monitor, his gaze sweeping the hallway, and for a terrifying second, I thought he'd seen me. I shrank back behind the door, my heart pounding, but his attention was elsewhere. He began issuing a series of quiet, rapid-fire commands to his men. The house was being locked down, transformed from a home into a military compound. I retreated back to the dining table, my legs unsteady. The opulence of the room now felt suffocating. This was the price of the safety he offered, this constant, simmering threat of violence. Could I live like this? Could I raise Lily in a world where men like Niccolo Falcone could appear at the gates at any moment? But what was the alternative? To go back to my old life? To face Silas and his thugs alone? To watch my daughter suffer because I couldn't afford her medicine? Dante had been right. I was drowning. He had thrown me a life raft, but that raft was tethered to a warship. The standoff at the gate seemed to last an eternity. I sat at the table, a forgotten piece of china in a room built for kings, and listened to the charged silence of the house. Eventually, I heard the faint purr of the silver sports car's engine as it drove away. The immediate threat had receded. A short time later, Dante returned to the dining room. His face was hard, his energy coiled and dangerous. He had won this small battle, this test of wills, but the war was clearly far from over. He stopped in front of me, looking down at my pale, frightened face. "You see now," he said, his voice flat. "The world is full of wolves, Ilara. Some, like your ex-boyfriend, are pathetic and weak, feeding on scraps. Others," he gestured vaguely towards the gate, "are organized. They hunt in packs. They are ruthless. The only way to be safe is to be under the protection of a stronger wolf." He was framing my confinement, my complete dependence on him, as an act of benevolent necessity. The mansion wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary. He wasn't my captor. He was my savior. And the most terrifying part was, a small, desperate part of me was beginning to believe him. The security he offered, however conditional, was a powerful anesthetic for a life lived in constant fear. He had shown me the Tyla's external threat. Now, it was time to eliminate the internal one. The next day, as if to prove his point about handling all the wolves in my life, Dante turned his attention to Kevin. I had spent a restless night in the luxurious four-poster bed, the silk sheets feeling like shackles. I had been allowed to see Lily that morning. She was sitting up in her own palatial room, watching cartoons on a television screen the size of a small cinema. A kindly-looking woman with gentle eyes, the pediatrician, Elena, at her side. Lily had giggled and told me about the magic castle and the nice doctor lady. She was happy. She was safe. The sight of her, so carefree and healthy, was a powerful argument in Dante's favor. It was a poison-tipped arrow aimed directly at my maternal heart, and it hit its mark. I was having coffee on the terrace, the morning sun warming my face, when Marco approached me. His presence was always jarring, a reminder of the invisible cage that surrounded me. "Miss Ilara," he said, his tone as formal as ever. "Mr. Moretti has requested your presence in his study." My stomach tightened. Another command performance. I followed him through the silent, opulent halls to a part of the house I hadn't seen yet. He opened a pair of heavy oak doors, revealing a study that looked like it belonged in a Gothic novel. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a massive fireplace, and a desk the size of a small boat. Dante was seated behind the desk, a laptop open before him. But my eyes were drawn to the man standing in front of the desk, flanked by two of Dante's impassive guards. Kevin. He looked terrible. His usually cocky grin was gone, replaced by a pasty, sweaty pallor. His eyes were wide with terror, darting around the room like a cornered rat. He was wearing the same faded band t-shirt and ripped jeans he'd probably been wearing for 3 days. Seeing him here, in this temple of power and wealth, was a jarring collision of my two worlds. My pathetic, messy past had been dragged into my terrifying, uncertain present. When he saw me, a flicker of hope or perhaps calculation entered his eyes. "Alara, baby, thank God. Tell them who I am. There's been a mistake." I just stared at him, my mind a blank slate of shock. Dante looked from Kevin to me, his expression cold and analytical. He gestured for me to take a seat in one of the leather armchairs near the desk. I did, my legs feeling weak. "There is no mistake, Mr. Johnson," Dante said, his voice dangerously soft. He had never even bothered to learn Kevin's name before this moment. "You have caused a great deal of trouble for someone I have taken an interest in." Kevin's bravado was a flimsy shield, and it was crumbling fast. "Look, man, I don't know who you are, but whatever she told you, it's a misunderstanding. Me and Alara, we're good. She's just emotional sometimes. You know how women get." He tried a weak, conspiratorial smile. Dante's eyes turned to ice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The sheer menace radiating from him was enough to suck the air from the room. "Do not speak about her. Do not look at her. You will address me." Kevin flinched as if struck. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Okay, man. "Look, the money. I was going to pay her back. I just hit a patch of bad luck." "Your luck has just run out," Dante said, cutting him off. He slid a folder across the polished surface of the desk. "This is a summary of the debt you accrued in Miss Alara's name. Credit cards, personal loans, and a particularly ill-advised loan from one Silas Cruz. The total comes to $26,342.18. Kevin stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. "That debt," Dante continued, his voice dropping even lower, "is now mine. You owe me." The terror in Kevin's eyes was absolute. He knew, instinctively, that owing money to this man was infinitely worse than owing it to a street-level thug like Silas. "And then there is the matter of your daughter," Dante said, his tone hardening further. "A child you have abandoned, a child whose medical needs you have ignored. This I find particularly offensive." "I was going to send money," Kevin blurted out, his voice cracking. "I swear, I was just getting back on my feet." Dante held up a hand, silencing him. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to sign this document." He pushed a single piece of paper towards Kevin. "It is a legal document, drafted this morning by my lawyers, terminating your parental rights to Lily. You will relinquish all claims, all contact, forever. You will cease to be her father in the eyes of the law." Kevin stared at the paper, his face a mask of disbelief. I can't do that." "You can," Dante said, calmly, "and you will. In return, your debt to me will be forgiven. You will also be given a one-way, first-class plane ticket to Anchorage, Alaska, and $10,000 in cash. A chance for you to get back on your feet, as you so eloquently put it. There is a job waiting for you on a fishing vessel. Hard work. It might build some character, though I doubt it." It was a complete and total erasure. Dante wasn't just removing Kevin from my life. He was rewriting my daughter's history, cutting out the rotten part with surgical precision. "And if I don't sign?" Kevin whispered, his last shred of defiance flickering. Dante leaned back in his chair, a look of profound disappointment on his face. He glanced at Marco. "Marco, what was the alternative we discussed for Mr. Johnson? Should he prove uncooperative?" Marco's face remained impassive. "A long-term, unpaid position, assisting with waste management and disposal at one of your agricultural properties upstate, sir. The accommodations are rustic." The euphemism hung in the air, thick with unspoken violence. Kevin understood. I understood. An agricultural property. Waste management. He would disappear. Kevin's entire body trembled. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked at the paper, then at Dante's unforgiving face, then at the two hulking guards. His will broke. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Give me the pen," he croaked. He signed the paper with a shaky hand, his signature a frantic scrawl. He didn't look at me once. He couldn't. He had been so thoroughly dominated, so completely unmanned, that he couldn't even meet my eyes. He had been reduced from the charming, swaggering man who had ruined my life to a terrified, broken creature. As soon as he was finished, the guards took him by the arms and hauled him out of the room. He was gone, just like that. A problem solved. A threat neutralized. I sat there in the silent study, the scent of old books and Kevin's cheap fear still hanging in the air. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt numb. The speed, the efficiency, the absolute ruthlessness of it all was overwhelming. Dante hadn't just helped me. He had wielded his power like a weapon, carving out a piece of my life and discarding it without a second thought. The other major threat, the war with the Falcone family, was handled with the same brutal efficiency, though most of it occurred off stage, a terrifying opera heard from the wings. In the days following Kevin's removal, the atmosphere in the mansion grew even more tense. The number of dark-suited men seemed to double overnight. They were a constant, silent presence in the halls, their faces grim, their eyes always scanning, watching. The house was no longer a home. It was a command center. I saw little of Dante during this time. He was consumed by his war. I would catch glimpses of him in his study, huddled with Marco and other senior men, maps spread across his desk. Their voices were always low, urgent. I saw weapons being cleaned and checked in a room in the basement that I had stumbled upon by accident. Polished handguns and sleek black rifles laid out on velvet cloths like surgical instruments. The sight had sent me scurrying back to the safety of my luxurious room, my heart hammering. This was his reality. A world of constant vigilance and calculated violence, and by extension, it was now mine and Lily's reality too. The gilded cage had become a fortress, and its high walls and armed guards were as much to keep danger out as they were to keep me in. One evening, the tension reached its peak. Dante was leaving. I found him in the foyer as he was preparing to go. He was dressed in black tactical gear that fit his lean, powerful frame like a second skin. He looked less like a businessman and more like a soldier, a hunter heading out into the night. Marco and a dozen of his best men were with him, all similarly attired, their faces set and serious. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice small in the vast marble-floored space. He turned to me, and for a moment, the mask of the commander slipped. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, regret, perhaps. "To end this," he said simply, "so that this house can be a home again, so that you and Lily can be safe, truly safe." "It's dangerous," I whispered, stating the obvious. A faint, grim smile touched his lips. "My entire life is dangerous, Alara. The difference is, now I have something worth protecting." He reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from my face, his fingers just grazing my cheek. The touch was feather light, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. "Stay inside. Do not leave the main house for any reason. Marco's second-in-command, Giorgio, will be in charge of your security. You will do exactly as he says." And then he was gone. I watched from the window as the convoy of black SUVs rolled silently down the driveway and disappeared into the night. The house felt unnervingly empty without him, the silence heavier than ever. I spent the night pacing my room, unable to sleep, my mind filled with images of violence and fear. I was terrified for him. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I, Alara, the nurse from the free clinic, was terrified for the safety of a mafia boss, a man who had effectively kidnapped me. The irony was not lost on me, but the emotion was undeniable. He returned just before dawn. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel and rushed to the window. The convoy was back. Men were getting out, their movements weary. I saw Dante emerge from the lead vehicle. He was moving slowly, favoring his left side. Even from a distance, I could see that his jacket was torn, and there was a dark stain on his sleeve. My nursing instincts kicked in, overriding everything else. I ran down the grand staircase, my bare feet slapping against the cold marble. I met him in the foyer. He looked exhausted, his face pale beneath a layer of grime, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. He was victorious. I could see it in the way he held himself, in the grim satisfaction on his face. The external threat had been resolved. "You're hurt," I said, my voice trembling. I reached for his arm, my fingers probing the torn fabric of his sleeve. "It is nothing," he grunted, but he winced as my fingers brushed against the injury. "Don't be an idiot," I snapped, the nurse in me taking over completely. "Come with me, now." To my surprise, he didn't argue. He allowed me to lead him, this powerful, dangerous man, through his own house to the large kitchen. I made him sit at the massive wooden island while I fetched the first aid kit I had insisted Sophia procure for me days earlier. The kitchen was warm and quiet, the early morning light beginning to stream through the windows. It felt like a pocket of normalcy in a world gone mad. I carefully cut away his sleeve, revealing a long, deep gash on his forearm. It wasn't a gunshot, but a knife wound. It was ugly, but not life-threatening. It would need stitches. "This is going to hurt," I said, echoing my words from that first night in the clinic. "I am aware," he said, his eyes fixed on my face, not on the wound. As I worked, cleaning the gash with antiseptic, my hands steady and sure, the barriers between us began to crumble. The power dynamics of captor and captive, of billionaire and pauper, faded away, replaced by something far more intimate and elemental. I was the caregiver, and he was the patient. He was vulnerable, and I was in control. The silence in the kitchen was different now. It wasn't tense or intimidating. It was soft, expectant. I could feel his gaze on me, tracing the lines of my face, the curve of my neck. I was intensely aware of his proximity, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the masculine scent of him sweat, blood, and that same expensive cologne. "The falcons?" I asked quietly as I threaded a suture needle. "They will no longer be a problem," he said, his voice a low rumble. "For anyone." The finality in his tone was absolute. He had not just defeated his rivals, he had erased them. Just as he had erased Kevin, it was what he did. He identified threats and eliminated them. I began to stitch the wound, my movements precise. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but his eyes never left my face. The intensity of his stare made my skin prickle, my heart beat faster. When I was finished, I taped a clean bandage over the stitches, my fingers lingering for a moment on his warm skin. I finally met his gaze. The whiskey-colored eyes were dark, swirling with emotions I couldn't name. gratitude, exhaustion, and something else, something deeper and more profound. "Thank you, Alara," he whispered. "It's my job," I said, my voice barely audible. "No," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is not your job." He reached up with his uninjured hand, his fingers gently cupping my jaw. His thumbs stroked my cheek, sending a shiver through my entire body. "You are not my nurse. You are not my prisoner." My breath caught in my throat. I was trapped, not by his guards or the high walls of his estate, but by the raw intensity of his gaze, by the gentle pressure of his hand on my skin. "Then what am I?" I whispered, the question I had been afraid to ask. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. It was as if a powerful magnetic force was drawing us together, a force that had been building since the moment I corrected his bodyguard's Italian in that dingy clinic. "You are mine," he murmured against my lips, and then he kissed me. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was hungry, possessive, a raw expression of all the pent-up tension and emotion of the past week. It was the kiss of a conqueror, claiming his prize, but it was also the kiss of a man who had been starved for something he couldn't name. And I, to my own shock and shame, kissed him back. I met his hunger with my own, a desperate, confused mess of fear and gratitude and a terrifying, undeniable attraction. My hands came up to tangle in his thick, dark hair, pulling him closer. In that moment, with the morning sun streaming into the quiet kitchen and the smell of blood and antiseptic in the air, I surrendered. I surrendered to the madness of my situation, to the dangerous man who had turned my life upside down, and to the startling realization that I no longer wanted to escape. The kiss ended as abruptly as it began. Dante pulled back, his breathing heavy, his eyes dark and stormy. He searched my face, looking for regret, for fear. He found none, only a dazed, wide-eyed acceptance. A week passed in a strange, dreamlike peace. The war was over. The house relaxed, shedding its military tension and becoming a home once more. The extra guards vanished, and the atmosphere grew lighter. Dante, for his part, was transformed. The ruthless commander was replaced by an attentive, almost gentle man I was only just beginning to know. He spent his days in his study, but his evenings were reserved for me and Lily. We ate dinner together every night, not in the formal dining room, but in the warm, inviting kitchen or on the terrace overlooking the valley. He would ask Lily about her day, listening with rapt attention as she chattered on about the squirrels she'd seen or the new book her tutor had read to her. He was surprisingly good with her, his natural authority softened by a genuine tenderness that melted my heart. He never tried to be her father, but he was a powerful, stable presence in her life, something she had never had. With me, he was different. He was patient, observant, as if he were studying a rare and complex creature. He never pushed, never demanded anything more than what I was willing to give. But the memory of that kiss hung between us, a silent promise, a palpable current of electricity that charged the air whenever we were close. We would talk for hours after Lily was asleep, sitting by the fire in the grand library. He would tell me about his business, the legitimate side of it, at least about the global shipping empire his father had built. And I would tell him about my life, about nursing school, about my dreams of one day working in pediatric oncology. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. Despite the peace, the luxury, the growing affection I felt for him, a question lingered in the back of my mind. I was still his captive, a willing one perhaps, but a captive nonetheless. The choice had never been mine. One evening, about a week after he had returned from his battle with the Falcons, he brought it up himself. We were on the balcony of my room, watching the sun set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. "All threats have been neutralized, Elara," he said, his voice quiet. He was standing beside me, but not touching me, giving me space. "Your old life has been dismantled. The debts are gone. Kevin is gone. The Falcanes are gone. You are safe." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the horizon. "I know. You are free to go," he said. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I turned to look at him, my heart pounding. His face was serious, his eyes searching mine. "What?" I whispered. "You can leave," he repeated, his voice steady, though I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. "I will not hold you here against your will. I will arrange for a house for you and Lily, anywhere you want to live. I will provide you with a stipend that will ensure you never have to worry about money again. You can go back to nursing or not. The choice will be yours. You will be completely independent. My protection will be discreet, but it will always be there. You will never be in danger again." It was everything I could have ever wanted. Freedom, security, a future for my daughter. It was the perfect solution, a clean break. So why did the thought of it feel like a knife in my gut? I looked at him, at this powerful, ruthless, complicated man who had saved me. I thought about my old life, the constant fear, the gnawing anxiety, the crushing weight of poverty. Then I thought about the past 2 weeks. The safety, the peace, the way he looked at Lily, the way he listened to me, the memory of his lips on mine. He had offered me a gilded cage, and then he had opened the door. He was giving me a choice, a real choice. My life was finally my own to direct. "You could have anything you want," I said, my voice trembling. "Any woman." "Why me?" He finally closed the distance between us, taking my hands in his. His palms were warm and strong. "Because you are not just any woman, Elara. You are strong. You are intelligent. You have a fire in you that the world tried to extinguish but failed. You walked into my world of darkness and brought a light I didn't know I was missing. You corrected my bodyguard. You stitched up my wound without flinching, and you look at me not with fear, but with an honesty that I have never known." He lifted one of my hands and pressed a soft kiss to the palm. "I do not want to be your benefactor, Elara. I do not want to be your discreet protector from afar. I want to be the man you come home to. I want to watch Lily grow up. I want to build a life with you. Here." Tears welled in my eyes, blurring his handsome face. He had laid his heart bare. He, Dante Moretti, a man who commanded armies and toppled empires, was asking, not demanding. Asking. My old life was a ghost, a memory of a person I no longer was. This place, this fortress that had once been my prison, had become my sanctuary. This dangerous man had become my protector, my confidant, my everything. The choice was clear. It had been clear for days. I just hadn't been brave enough to admit it to myself. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was a woman making a conscious choice about her future. "I don't want a house somewhere else," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't want a stipend." A flicker of hope, bright and fierce, ignited in his eyes. "I want to stay," I said, the words feeling more right than anything I had ever said in my life. "With you." A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, breathtaking smile that transformed his harsh features and made him look years younger. It was the first time I had ever seen him truly smile. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an eternity. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "My world is not a simple one. My life has never been simple," I replied, a watery smile of my own on my lips. "At least with you, I know I'm safe." He pulled me into his arms, crushing me against his chest in a fierce, possessive embrace. He buried his face in my hair, and I could feel the tension drain out of his powerful frame. He was holding me as if I were the most precious thing in the world, the anchor in his storm-tossed life. "You will never have to be afraid again, Mia Cara," he murmured into my hair. "My love, I swear it." In that moment, wrapped in his arms on the balcony of our home, I knew I had made the right choice. I had stepped out of one cage and into another, but this one felt less like a prison and more like a home. It was a conscious choice, my first true act of agency in this new life, and it was a surrender. An emotional surrender to a future I could never have imagined, with a man I was just beginning to love. The days that followed were a blur of quiet domesticity and deepening intimacy. The foundation of our relationship, built on a bedrock of crisis and intervention, began to solidify into something real and enduring. Dante was true to his word. I was not his possession. I was his partner. He included me in discussions about the house, asked my opinion on menus, and even took me into his study to explain the complex, legitimate side of his business empire, the shipping lines, the real estate holdings, the philanthropic foundation his father had started. He was slowly, carefully, integrating me into every facet of his life. My own life began to take shape within the walls of the estate. I spent my mornings with Lily, whose health had improved dramatically. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, replaced by the rosy glow of a happy, healthy child. We explored the vast grounds, had picnics by the small lake, and she even started riding lessons on a gentle pony Dante had acquired for her. He had given my daughter back her childhood, a gift so immense I knew I could never repay it. One evening, about a month after I had made my choice to stay, Dante led me into the library after dinner. A fire was crackling in the hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow over the leather-bound books. He seemed nervous, a state so alien to him that it immediately put me on edge. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my hand finding his. He squeezed my fingers, leading me to the sofa in front of the fire. "Everything is perfect," he said, his voice a low thrum of emotion. He sat beside me, turning to face me, his expression more serious than I had ever seen it. "Ilara," he began, "when you came into my life, it was like a light being switched on in a dark room. I was living, but I was not alive. I was surrounded by people, but I was utterly alone. My life was about control, power, and the ghosts of my past." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. "You have shown me what it means to care for someone, to protect someone, not out of a sense of duty or to right an old wrong, but out of love." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a ring. It was not a modern, flashy diamond. It was a vintage piece, an intricate band of platinum set with a single, magnificent sapphire, the color of a twilight sky, flanked by smaller, glittering diamonds. It was elegant, timeless, and breathtakingly beautiful. "This was my mother's," he said softly, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "It was her mother's before her." It was the one thing she managed to keep, the one piece of her old life that the man who destroyed her couldn't take. She gave it to me before she died, and told me to give it to a woman who was strong, kind, and worthy of a life filled with joy. A woman who would be my queen. He took the ring from the box, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle. He looked at me, his soul bare in his whiskey-colored eyes. I know it is fast. I know our world is complicated, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Alara, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you be my queen? The words, the ring, the raw emotion in his voice. It was all too much. Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This man, this dangerous, powerful, and intensely loving man, was offering me not just his protection, not just his wealth, but his name, his future, his heart. He was offering me a family. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a frantic, tearful bobbing of my head. Yes, I finally managed to whisper, my voice choked with emotion. Yes, Dante. Yes. A look of profound relief and radiant happiness washed over his face. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. The cool metal felt like a brand, a promise, a final, definitive seal on my new life. He pulled me into his arms, and this time, his kiss was not one of possession or hunger. It was a kiss of deep, reverent love, a promise of a shared future. It was a kiss that sealed our commitment, a bond forged in the fires of desperation and violence, now tempered into something beautiful and unbreakable. Later that night, I stood on our balcony, the sapphire on my finger catching the moonlight. The valley below was dark and peaceful, the only lights the distant, glittering stars. Lily was sleeping soundly in her room, safe and healthy. Dante came up behind me, wrapping his strong arms around my waist, pulling me back against his solid chest. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his presence a warm, comforting weight. "What are you thinking about, Mia Regina?" he murmured into my ear. "My queen." I leaned my head back against his shoulder, looking at the ring, then out at the peaceful darkness. "I was just thinking," I said, my voice soft with wonder, "about how it all started." With a misdirected sentence in a language I barely remembered, how a single accidental moment can change a life forever. He tightened his embrace, his lips brushing against my temple. "It was not an accident, Alara," he said, his voice filled with a certainty that was as profound as the night sky. "It was fate." And looking out at our future, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my back, I knew he was right. It wasn't a gilded cage anymore. It was home. It was a kingdom. And I was its queen. My life of fear and instability was over, replaced by a future filled with safety, family, and a fierce, all-consuming love I had found in the most unexpected of places. It was a new beginning, born from a single fateful encounter, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow in the darkest of soils. I was secure. I was committed. I was, finally, truly loved.